When you hear the 24 Hours of Le Mans, you think of pure, raw, top speed. And no racing series has ever reached a higher speed than Group C. Now, Group C actually had its origins with the super silhouette racers of the 70s, Group 5. And that was a brilliant series. Massive body kits, misproportioned wings, crazy aerodynamics, tons of manufacturers, huge crowds, and a lot of fun. It was brilliant. However, by the time the late 70s rolled around, there were a few issues, primarily revolving around turbocharging. For instance, the Porsche 935 was the most successful one of the era, winning Le Mans outright because, thanks to 40 psi of boost producing 850 horsepower, it was going faster than the top tier prototypes of the era down the straightaway. Yeah. And thanks to the brand new 1978 oil crisis, having crazy fuel inefficient monsters with massive turbos were not the most appealing things anymore. So the FIA decided they would introduce a new class of motorsport to replace the Group 5 silhouettes. A fuel economy class. Yes, Group C, as you know it, started out because they needed to save some fuel. And the way they did it was by having 100-liter capacity fuel tanks. So you could have a massive turbocharged monster, but you would have to pit a lot more often than, say, a naturally aspirated car. And the joy was you would have whatever engine you wanted. V12s, V6s, turbocharged V8s, whatever you want, you could have it. And in its debut year, 1982, Ford and Porsche both arrived on the scene with some monsters. The Ford C100, 540 horsepower from a 4-liter V8, but Porsche could beat them with the brand new 956 with 620 horsepower from a turbocharged flat 6. And these things were already going 220 down the straightaway. Not bad for a debut year. 1983 rolled around, more manufacturers joined the fray with BMW, Toyota, and Lancia joining the fray. Also, there was a bit of a price war going on. You see, these cars are expensive. Massive aerodynamics, crazy new engines, and tons of R&D. Meaning prices were quite high and costs were rising. So they made the short-lived juniors class, or C2. That wasn't quite as popular as the main class, and it was later morphed into just the Group C2 class later on. But back to the main story. 1984. There were more new teams like Jaguar, Aston Martin, and Lola joining the fray. And 1985 saw the introduction of Mercedes-Sauber. Oh, and by the way, FYI, from 1982 to 1986, Porsche won literally every single championship. Drivers and manufacturers. Yeah, in 1983, for instance, out of the 22 top drivers in the championship standings, 21 of them were driving Porsches. Either the 956 or the next iteration, the 962. Similar cars, slightly different variants. And Yeah, they were quite good. They were quite good. They were scary, in fact. Because they were crazy powerful, almost 650 horsepower by 1985. They weighed less than 2,000 pounds, and they went around 230 miles an hour. In fact, the German onslaught looked unstoppable, but history found a way of repeating itself. Because in order to stop the German blitzkrieg, we turned to Jaguar in Britain, with the Jaguar XJ-R8 and 9. 1987, those cars officially debuted to massive success. These vehicles had naturally aspirated V12s, producing 750 horsepower. And thanks to that massive power and the super streamlined bodywork down to having wheel covers for better aerodynamics, these cars could reach 245 miles an hour on the streets. That was faster than anything Le Mans had ever seen at that time. And as a result, Jaguar won the Drivers' and Manufacturers' Championship in 1987 and 1988. But the Germans were ready to strike back, not with Porsche, but with Mercedes. The Mercedes-Sauber C9. This was actually a turbocharged V8, 730 horsepower, this one, and it was also very successful. Not only did it win the championship, it won Le Mans outright in 1989 as well. But admittedly, that win at Le Mans was slightly overshadowed by Peugeot, who reached a speed never seen before or since of 253 miles an hour. That is faster than a Bugatti Veyron in 1989. Now granted, the car broke down a few hours later and was out of the race, but no vehicle has ever got close to that speed in the 30 years since. That's quite impressive. But 1990, they weren't actually allowed to compete. They had a scheduling issue, and the Group C cars weren't actually allowed to compete, despite the fact that the year prior, the ratings on TV stands had actually gotten to the point where Group C was officially more popular than Formula 1. Anyway, they were back in 1991 with Jaguar taking the title with a new XJR14 that redlined at 11,000 RPM. Speaking of red lines, that noise is a very familiar noise. The four-rotor Mazda 787B. Mazda actually joined a few seasons before 1991, but they didn't have any success because they were using a rotary engine, no cylinders at all. And they didn't really have the overall pace, but what they did have was reliability. In fact, that is what led them to become the only non-piston powered vehicle to ever win Le Mans outright in 1991. Yes, that is right, the 787B claimed victory at the 24 Hours of Le Mans for Group C Racing, becoming one of two Japanese manufacturers to ever win Le Mans, with Toyota kind of winning last year. That's a discussion for another day. it was shown in the engine. They took apart the engine. That rotary is so reliable, they could have driven it flat out for another 24 hours afterwards. And at this point, things went a bit wrong. The FIA saw that prices were too expensive, so they cut costs by forcing everyone to use a standard Formula 1 engine, the 3.5-liter V10. And teams like Mercedes and Toyota thought, if I'm using a Formula 1 engine, why wouldn't I just compete in Formula 1? So they did, and they left Group C Le Mans. Now, Toyota did actually stay. In fact, only Toyota and Peugeot were the only major manufacturers to stay in 1992, and Peugeot would claim victory at both Le Mans and the championship outright. But in 1993, manufacturers were so sparse in Group C that they had to cancel the entire sports car championship season. And they did have modified, detuned Group C cars at Le Mans, but they weren't their own class, and by 1994, they were gone altogether. Now, they did have a sneaky workaround where some guy bought a bunch of Porsche 962s, modified them to road car spec, and then kept one stock as our Group C car, and entered the new GT1 class, and won with an old car, and then they subsequently banned that because that was sneaky, and that marked the last time a Group C car would ever win Le Mans. And the last win for a Group C ever would come shortly after, with the Porsche 962 winning 10 years after it was created at the Japanese Touring Car Championship in 1994. The series died just as fast as it was created. But if one thing was to show you how fast these cars were, in 1984, during qualifying for the 24 Hours of Nürburgring, a Group C Porsche 962 set a Nordschleife lap record of 6 minutes 11 seconds. A record that would stand for over 30 years. These cars were the technological masterstrokes of the generation, and were some of the longest lasting cars ever, and one of the few racing series to ever be more popular than Formula 1. Will we ever see another Group C? Not really. The closest we had to it was LMP1, which had a whopping 4 manufacturers at its height. So, this freedom of engine choice is coming back with the hypercar regulations in 2020. But these crazy futuristic wedges warping space-time as they fly past will most likely never be seen again. But we'll never forget that they happened.